If you've ever watched creative work fall apart after it looked promising, not because the idea was bad, but because the room couldn't decide what good meant, this is for you. Most teams think that their problem is a lack of creativity, or that they need better ideas, more inspiration, less structure. Because structure in creative work usually sounds like rules, like limitations, like bureaucracy. Something that shows up late and kills the whole momentum. But that belief is exactly why creativity keeps breaking. Not because structure limits creativity, but because judgment appears everywhere before anyone decides how it's supposed to work. So structure only appears once things are already tense, and by then it can only feel like control. If feedback keeps multiplying, meetings keep getting louder, and the work gets worse the longer it's discussed, especially once your name is attached to it, this is not a creativity problem. You leave the meeting thinking, okay, I thought this was settled. But then it comes back. Same work, new doubts, new opinions. The defense kicks in. And at that point, structure doesn't feel helpful. It feels like blame. In this video, I'm going to explain you why structured creativity almost always feels wrong, why teams reject it until it's too late, and why that reaction is the main reason why creativity turns political. This is the logic you need before any system can actually help. What makes this hard to see is that structure rarely enters the room quietly. It enters the room after something has already failed. Ideas are already on the table, preferences are already formed, and people have already spoken. And at that point, structure doesn't feel like support. It feels like correction, and correction always feels personal. Nobody experiences structure early. They experience it late. Late enough that someone feels constrained, someone feels overruled, someone feels exposed. So structure in creativity gets associated with control, not because it is control, but because of how late in the process it shows up. That's the first misunderstanding. Structure isn't rejected because it limits creativity. It's rejected because it arrives at the exact moment when people are most emotionally invested. Here's what usually comes before. Teams start open. Open briefs, open brainstorms, open questions. Freedom feels generous. No one is boxed in. No one is wrong yet. No one has to defend anything. And for a while, this feels productive. But judgment doesn't disappear just because it hasn't been named. It shows up anyway. Someone reacts, someone hesitates, someone pushes back. But because no one decided how judgment would work, it happens quietly. Through tone, through taste, through status. Not because anyone planned it, but because it had nowhere else to go. So the room stays polite, and the work gets worse. From the inside, this phase feels reasonable. Open questions feel inclusive. What do you think? How does it feel? Any thoughts? No one gets excluded, no one has to commit, and that feels safe. But safety has a cost. When no one decides how judgment works, everyone participates. And participation is not the same as ownership. So ideas scatter. Not because people disagree, but because they are answering different questions in their heads. One person is reacting to tone, another to risk, another to taste. None of that is wrong, it's just uncoordinated. This is the phase where people start saying, this feels messy, we are going in circles, we need alignment. And this is where structure shows up, late, after frustration, after fatigue, after somebody's patience runs out. Now someone introduces criteria, rules, structures, frameworks, not as guidance, but as containment. And at this stage, structure doesn't feel like protection. It feels like enforcement. Because it's being added to people, not to the work. So creatives push back, stakeholders disengage, and meetings get tense. And everyone walks away thinking, structure kills creativity. But that's not what happened. Structure didn't fail. The timing did. Here's the part that rarely gets named. By the time structure arrives, the work is no longer the only thing being evaluated. You are. Preferences have been voiced. Positions have been taken. The reputation is now at stake. So any constraint feels personal, and rules feel targeted. Any attempt to clarify feels like a power move. And once your name is attached, this doesn't end with the meeting. The work follows you home. When this keeps happening, teams rarely blame timing. They blame personalities. This team is too opinionated. That person is difficult to work with. Creatives are too sensitive. Stakeholders just don't get it. But notice what those explanations do. They turn a structural failure into a character flaw. And once that happens, nothing in the system actually changes. People rotate, the pattern stays. The reason this keeps repeating is that structure is treated like a fix. You add it only once something fails. But by then, it can only feel like control. Because the moment people care about ideas, they also care about how those ideas reflect on them. And anything that constrains expression after that point will always feel threatening. So most teams learn the wrong lesson. They learn to avoid structure in creativity, which guarantees they will need it later. Once you see this, you start noticing a pattern. Not in creativity, in timing. Structure in creativity isn't rejected because it's wrong. It's rejected because it arrives at the moment when it can only feel like control. Which raises a more uncomfortable question. If structure feels wrong once the idea exists, what would it have to look like before they do? And that's where this goes next.